Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session for the day. The session today for our town hall is going to be managing the marathon, dealing with the stress of a prolonged emergency. So today, I just want to go through a few housekeeping things first so that everyone's on the same page. First of all, please note that you're all in listen-only mode. This is to limit the ambient feedback during the presentation. So just so you know, we can't hear you if you're talking to us. Please use the chat box or the questions box to let us know if you're having any issues. Today's session is being recorded. A copy of the recording will be sent out to everyone registered within 48 hours. In fact, you'll probably actually see it in your inbox tomorrow morning. Please use the questions box to ask any questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be sure to ask them at the end. So you know, some organizations do block the GoToWebinar launch window. This means you may have to join us by phone if you're having trouble hearing or seeing the session. Now I'm going to take a moment to introduce our presenters and panelists for the day. Today's presenter is Dr. Nicholas Carleton. He's the CIPSRT Scientific Director and Professor of Psychology at the University of Regina. Then we have our panelists. First, Jason Shaw, Assistant Chief of Emergency Preparedness for Winnipeg Fire and Paramedic Service. Chief Matthew Pegg, Chief of Toronto Fire Services and lead for Toronto's COVID-19 response. And then Tom Sampson, who's Chief of the Calgary Emergency Management Agency. All right. So before we get started today, we are going to do a few polls with you guys, just so we can kind of get a sense of how you're feeling about the current situation. Our first poll is going to be, has the COVID-19 pandemic made you feel fatigued or burnt out? So I'm just going to go ahead and launch that poll. Feel free to answer on your screen. I'll give you about a minute. Okay, so I can see the answers rolling in, which is great. Thank you so much for participating. I'm going to give you about 15 more seconds here. All right, so we do have the bulk of you having answered, so I'm just going to close the poll, and then I'm going to share the results with you here. So as you can see, 43% of you did say yes, you are feeling fatigued and burned out by the pandemic. 53% of you said sometimes, and those lucky 5% said no, I'd like to be you. So I'm glad that you're not experiencing the same thing as others are experiencing. So let's move on to our next poll. The second poll is, what is the thing from the list I was able to share with you that has stressed you out the most during the pandemic? I'm just going to launch that poll right now, and again, give you about a minute to answer. Okay, so you got about 15 more seconds. All right, and I'm going to close the poll now, and let's share these answers with you. So it looks like 7% are stressed out by not having enough time for self-care. 24% are stressed out by other people not following the rules. 20% are stressed out by juggling work and home life without the usual supports. 22% of you are stressed by an increased workload, and 26%, the highest there, are missing contact with friends and family. And I can completely understand that. That's one of the things that's stressing me out too. All right, so I am now going to turn it over to Dr. Carleton to go through his presentation. I'll just turn that over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Emily. And is everybody able to see the presentation slides? Did this transfer work, Emily?
Yeah, we're all up and seeing it.
Terrific. So today we're going to talk a little bit about managing the marathon and specifically dealing with some of the stress that people can experience during a prolonged emergency. So as Emily mentioned, I'm Dr. Nick Carleton. I'm a registered clinical psychologist, a professor of psychology, and I'm currently serving as the scientific director for CIPSRT. I don't have any commercial interests or relationships to declare, and I'm very pleased and grateful to have a tremendous amount of research support from a variety of government agencies and government-related agencies. Let's start with a little bit of background about traumatic events, specifically potentially psychologically traumatic events. So a PPTE is a stressful event that can cause diverse mental health injuries. And these include things like significant threats of harm to oneself or loved ones. And this can be experienced directly, so something that happens specifically to you, or indirectly, something that you witnessed firsthand, or further indirectly, something that you witnessed the aftermath of, or that you learned about happening to a loved one, or that you experienced as part of providing support or care. Exposure to a single PPTE can lead to several different mental health injuries, which include, but are certainly not limited to, post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, and panic disorder. Most PPTE lasts seconds or minutes or maybe hours. Very rarely does a PPTE last days or weeks. And it's important to remember that not everybody exposed to any given PPTE becomes injured. That's part of why we call them potentially psychologically traumatic events, because they are potentially psychologically traumatic, not necessarily psychologically traumatic. And whether we experience them as psychologically traumatic or whether we experience an injury after such an exposure depends on a myriad of different variables. And those variables change across different people, across different situations, and even across different times. We also have protracted PPTEs, which is an extensive way really of saying a PPT that lasts for or repeats over the course of days, weeks, or months. So it is still a potentially psychologically traumatic event, but it is protracted. It lasts much longer than we would expect. These can lead to increasingly comorbid mental health injuries. They can distort our sense of self or our core personal or social identities. They can cause significant emotional dysregulation, as can be expected if I'm exposed to something that is potentially psychologically traumatic for a long period of time. They can also cause difficulties with how I think, how I act, my relationships with other people, and my physical health, because our physical health and our mental health are necessarily interrelated. Most people can be expected to be impacted by being exposed to a protracted PPTE. And they can cause diverse mental health injuries, just like a PPTE can. That said, not everyone exposed to a protracted PPTE becomes injured in the same way as not everybody exposed to a PPTE becomes injured. So let's talk about COVID-19 as a protracted PPTE. There's an ongoing discourse about COVID-19 serving in this capacity or being framed in this capacity, but for today, let's talk a little bit about the fact that the threat has lasted several months, so since March of 2020. And based on the best information we have so far, it's likely to last for at least several more months or possibly even 1 to 2 more years. There's a bunch of challenges that go along with COVID-19 as a protracted PPTE. One of them is that the threat is effectively invisible. We know it's there, but because it's so small and because it's difficult for us to identify with the naked eye, it means that it's not something we are for sure able to identify independently. The threat is also ambiguous in a variety of ways. It's difficult for us to identify whether we or someone else has COVID-19, so whether we are exposed to that threat. It's difficult for us to qualify the threat because there's a lot of variability with respect to it. So if I am being threatened by this, or if I experience COVID-19, what's likely to happen? And that makes it difficult for us to calculate or quantify the individual levels of threat that we experience as part of going through COVID-19 collectively. So how much risk am I personally at? What's the danger level for me, for my loved ones, or for people working around me? The threat is also pervasive. It's happening around the entire world. People are experiencing this as a threat, and it's very difficult to definitively avoid because it's hard for me to make sure with absolute certainty that I'm not exposed to COVID-19 or that someone that I love or someone that I work with is not going to be exposed and then injured by COVID-19. This creates a state of pervasive uncertainty. And that pervasive uncertainty we know is associated with a variety of problems for mental health because human beings, on average, don't do well with uncertainty. It's not our favorite thing. It's part of why it's considered to be a significant risk factor for many different mental health injuries. In this case, the uncertainty is related to the level of threat. I don't know how much threat I'm specifically under at any given time. It's related to the most effective protective actions. And that's not necessarily because science isn't evolving with respect to giving us the best possible information. It's because the requirements and the recommendations have changed, which is normal. That's actually an indication that science is doing its job. So from the beginning of the pandemic to where we are now, the recommendations and the instructions that we're receiving from our experts in health are changing. That's a good indication that we're actually gaining information and making ground. But it also leaves us in a state of uncertainty and creates challenges with respect to us following the best possible rules. Children's education. For a lot of people, this was a major issue and is a major issue right now as we reopen schools in an attempt to get children back to their education processes for all of the important reasons that needs to be part of our conversation. We're also uncertain about our household finances. The economy is being dramatically impacted, whether we're able to stay at home and look after children who are home, whether we go back to work, how we're going to sustain the economy. These are important questions, and they've added a level of uncertainty to our financial health as well. Our personal health, our mental health, and our physical health is under an uncertain amount of risk, and so is our family health. So collectively right now, we're experiencing a variety of different elements of uncertainty across a variety of domains of our lives, and we're not sure how long they're going to last. A protracted PPTE needs to be engaged with differently than a time-limited PPTE. So things that we would normally use to interact with a stressor, like grit or avoidance, so stick-to-itness or pretend that it's not there, or distraction strategies. Short-term strategies alone in general are unlikely to be sufficient because most of the time, even reasonably healthy short-term strategies are exactly that, short-term. They're not designed to last for weeks, months, years on end. So managing COVID-19 as a protracted PPTE is going to require that we reframe our expectations. We need to understand that the challenges and the changes and the limitations and the requirements are here for at least the next couple of years. And we need to create ways for us to maintain the marathon as we're going forward. This means implementing and maintaining sustainable individual, organizational, systemic, and structural coping strategies. So where we may have in the past decided, yes, we can flex up and push through and we'll work those extra hours and we'll do those extra things and we'll extend ourselves beyond what we would normally find sustainable, those kinds of solutions are rapidly shifting into problems in and of themselves because they're not sustainable. This means we need multifaceted solutions that are tailored to each individual organization and to each individual environment. Part of what we're hearing already is people are reporting symptoms of something called burnout, particularly our frontline workers and our public safety personnel. We're hearing this increasingly commonly, that before the pandemic hit, many of our public safety personnel and frontline workers were already exhausted. They didn't have a lot of extra capacity to begin with, and now they're being asked to do even more, often with even less resource. Feelings of cynicism can break in, you can feel detached from your job and have a sense of ineffectiveness and a lack of accomplishment, in no small part because you're in a marathon where we don't know exactly where the end is. This can cause us to react differently to others, often negatively. This can create inappropriate outbursts or attitudes, make us more irritable, cause us to lose idealism and withdraw from a lot of the social supports and the interaction supports that would actually help us make it through the pandemic. Burnout can be influenced by high caseloads or a lack of control or agency over policies and procedures. Well, those are things that right now are part of our experience. It can also be influenced by unfairness or perceptions of unfairness in organizational structure and discipline, and by having perceptions that your peers or your supervisors and your management and your leadership team are not supporting you. Burnout is very specific to occupational contexts, and we shouldn't be using that term to refer to contexts outside of occupations. Not because you can't experience these things outside of your occupations, but because there's different terms that better fit areas of those kinds of distress outside of work. It's also distinct from compassion fatigue and vicarious stress and vicarious trauma because it's not necessarily or exclusively related to a PPTE event. That doesn't mean, though, that a PPTE event or a protracted PPTE event doesn't facilitate or lead people to experience burnout. We also know that it's associated with symptoms of other mental health injuries like anxiety and depression and absenteeism. And importantly, burnout can occur even in a psychologically supportive environment if the psychological demands remain high for protracted periods. This is part of the challenge that we're all in right now. So you can have a very supportive leadership environment and a very psychologically safe workplace, and the stressor can still ultimately exhaust those capacities and resources if a sustainability plan is not in place and if ongoing structural sustainability is not maintained. So what are some of the things that we can do? Well, a lot of the resources that we have available on the CIPSRT COVID-19 Readiness Response Project site are really important tools that should be revisited regularly by leadership and membership in order to provide them with sustainable reminders about how we manage the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated stressors. This includes webinars, summaries, new summaries that we're hoping to release soon, recommendations that are available in text and in video format, and mindfulness tools. All of these are components of part of a broader scale series of solutioning that we need in order to manage the pandemic. Some of the major actions that we think may be beneficial so far include focusing on constructive and supportive communication. And this may mean you need brief retraining or reminders, or your team needs brief retraining and reminders about what that looks like, particularly since we're hearing indications people are burned out already. That means they're more likely, as you heard, to be irritable and to interact in increasingly challenging ways with each other because they're all under a blanket stressor. It's important to demonstrably value and empower your team members. With the added levels of uncertainty and the loss of agency, where we can provide agency, at least over self-care and over job demands and job duties, we should provide that agency, certainly where it's safe and where we believe people have the capacity to manage it. We also want to facilitate consistency. As uncertainty in other areas grows, it's important to provide certainty or the perceptions of certainty in areas where we can, so that we have some respite, some areas where we can feel like we do have control and certainty in our lives. We also need to manage our internal expectations. And so I mean that internal to ourselves, but also internal to our organizations regarding uncertainty and change. There was still a lot of surprise that we heard from people as the science changed and changed the recommendations. We need to make sure that we explicitly remind everyone during an unprecedented pandemic and an unprecedented response to it, there's going to be areas of uncertainty and change. So that means that that instability, at least for part of our lives, is part of our reality. So the faster we accept that and begin to plan around it, the easier it can be for us to navigate the emotions that can go along with it. We also need to manage external expectations regarding capacity. This is important and difficult. So we may no longer have the ability to maintain a flexed up scenario. We may no longer have the ability to maintain certain deliverables on an ongoing basis because of the stressors that we're experiencing related to the broader stressor that is COVID-19. This requires some open and frank communication, and it requires expectation management at all levels so that we're not saying we can continue to deliver something that we can no longer deliver, and therein risking burnout and stress and potentially risking failing to actually deliver on expectations. We also want to recognize and emphasize success everywhere that we can right now, because we need cheerleading as part of making it through a marathon. Anyone who's ever run a marathon knows that ongoing positive thoughts and reinforcement is important. In this case, sustained performance, people showing up at work and continuing to meet the job expectations that they were planning for, this in and of itself is a success, and that needs to be recognized and applauded regularly because we're experiencing the ongoing challenge. This means systemic levels of self-care are important, and we may need workplace structures to be put into place that did not exist yet or had not existed to help support self-care. So it's easy enough for me to tell everybody you should be doing your self-care and you should be managing your good sleep and physical hygiene parameters and looking after your own health. But if I'm then saying, but I still expect that you're going to continue through the pandemic working 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, I've created a structural barrier. So we need to remove those structural barriers and instead go further to create structural supports where possible for self-care. This involves things like regular brief retraining, because we need those reminders about what the latest research says and about how we are going to have to change our activities, but we also need to be reminded about the importance of mental and physical care and self-care. This can be done with frequent, consistent, transparent, and interactive communications. And there's a host of different ways that you can do that depending on your organization. Daily meetings, social media, emails, regular Zoom conference calls, or other telemedia conference calls. There's a host of different ways you can do this, but that communication is critical. You also want to, where possible, build increasing algorithms to help people reduce anxiety and uncertainty when they're making decisions while they're under COVID. So if you've got a set of rules that people can follow as part of a new decision tree that you need built, make sure that's available for everyone. And where possible, build those decision trees so that you can increase certainty and therein reduce levels of anxiety and distress. If you're in a leadership role, do your best to remain visible and express empathy. You probably already know that visibility of leaders is important for maintaining morale and supporting the ongoing mental health of your organization and your members. That's that much more important now. And it's important for people to be reminded that your leaders have the empathy regarding the situation they're experiencing, in no small part because we also need to remember that our leaders, including yourselves, are experiencing the stressor as well. And that means they need to look after their mental health, their physical health through self-care in order to be the leaders that we need them to throughout the entire pandemic. Social connections and peer support remain important as always. And although we must remain socially distant, there can be innovative ways for you to stay connected through conference calling, through telecommunications of other sorts, through individual texts back and forth with quick check-ins as peers and family members can do remotely. And you want to support wherever possible healthy, sustainable routines. And so that's a big message that we all need reinforced all the time. I myself, when I'm under stress, like the occasional additional dessert. Well, in March and April, it was probably okay, maybe, for me to have more than one occasional dessert because I was experiencing stress and having a treat. But those kinds of choices over the long period aren't great, and they're not sustainable and create new challenges. So instead, it's time to revisit, reset, and create a new sustainable, healthy routine in spite of COVID-19. This means also reminding everyone self-care is not a luxury. We need to engage in regular mental health monitoring, and we try to make that easier through the screening tools that we have available for free on the CIPSRT website. They're entirely anonymous, and we encourage you to make use of them. This also means maintaining and creating, where necessary, routines. Looking after sleep hygiene, which we have a ton of information available on our website about. Daily exercise, even 15 minutes of cardio and 15 minutes of resistance training can make a huge difference for yourself. Healthy eating. So yes, the chocolate cake is great, but I probably should have a bowl of vegetables instead. Avoiding substance use. So it can be tempting to use substances like alcohol or marijuana in order to relax or in order to reward yourself for surviving a stressful day. But we want to watch that because there can be problems associated with that ongoing substance use, as we all know. Taking regular breaks. We need to be able to take breaks, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's possible nowadays for you to end up in front of a screen for 8 or 9 hours without getting out of your chair and without having a break. That's challenging. Make sure that you're taking those breaks regularly and stay connected to your friends, your family, and your work teams. If you need it, access professional care. There's professional care available in a lot of the organizations and agencies. There's professional care that's available through a variety of different sources and resources on our website. And we recommend you use the evidence-based care wherever possible. There's a lot of pseudoscience available right now on the internet because there's relatively limited filtering. So use evidence-based registered mental health care options wherever possible. You can access those through colleges, through the professional colleges, through registered provincial associations. These include your nurses, your physicians, your psychiatrists, your psychologists, your social workers, your occupational therapists. There's a host of different groups that can use that evidence-based care. And get help early and as needed. Getting help early for a mental health injury has the same or can have the same impact as getting help early for a physical health injury. The sooner you get help, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to succeed at getting better that much faster and getting back to your life. There's 3 things that I'd like to leave you with to remember as particularly important. First, we are in a marathon, so we need to reframe expectations. We need to change our understanding of how we're going to manage this stressor as an individual, as a collective group, and as a society as a whole. We need to implement sustainable solutions that involve multiple different ways for us to intervene to provide protections for ourselves and each other. We need to make them tailored to the individual needs that we all have, and we need to support them with structural solutions. It cannot be all on the individual or all on the organization. As cliche as this may sound at this point, we are in this together, which means the solution needs to be a collaborative solution that we can all sustain. Second, you're not alone. None of us are. And I hope that that's being emphasized by the efforts that we're putting forward through the COVID Readiness Response Project. But you can also see that as efforts that we see through our Wellness Together Canada programming that is available online. And recently through the Royal Society of Canada, stepping up with scientists from coast to coast, trying to provide resources and supports for everyone as we manage this challenge together. Last, but I certainly think, and I hope not least, it can be very easy during times of protracted stress and difficulty, particularly with how we are fed the new information through media on a constant basis, seemingly in an inescapable series of fashions, for us to focus very much on challenges and very much on the proverbial darkness, if you will, making it harder for us to focus on successes and focus on the light. We are all here and we are all succeeding. That's why I leave you with this quote that I've always enjoyed very much from Mr. Rogers, and I think it's applicable as we all sustain the next few years of managing COVID-19. When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And our public safety personnel and all of our emergency response teams and all of our frontline workers are the helpers. They are the ones making a difference for all of us, and they really are going to help sustain all of us through COVID-19. So let us focus on the incredible successes that they are having and support them in sustaining those successes going forward. Thank you very much. I look forward to the questions and the panel discussion.
Much, Nick, for that wonderful presentation. So I am going to welcome our panelists back if they want to go ahead and turn on their videos. We are just going to run one more poll with you guys, though, before we do that. And this is just another quick poll just to kind of get a view on what you guys are feeling. So the last poll we're going to run for the day is, do you practice self-care? I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll for you right now. You guys can go ahead and answer. All right, so I'm glad to see the answers flooding in. I'm going to give you another 15 seconds. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and let's share the results. So it looks like 39% of you indicate that yes, and you focus on making time for it. That's wonderful to hear. I'm happy to hear that so many of you are making sure to make time for self-care. Looks like 46% indicate that sometimes if you have time, and I can understand it's hard to find time these days, but glad that it's something you're trying to do. 14% say rarely, I'm often too exhausted, and 1% say no, I don't have the time. I'm glad to see that the percentages of those people that are not attempting self-care are low, and I can understand how being too exhausted is pretty common. So I'm going to go ahead and hide those results, and I'll welcome our panelists. I think we are just missing Chief Sampson. If you wanted to go ahead and turn your video back on, Chief Sampson, that'd be great. Okay, wonderful. All right, well, thank you everyone for being here today. I appreciate it, and I know that you guys are gonna share a wealth of knowledge with us. I am gonna start with first discussion question, which is, what is each of you doing in your particular city to support the mental health of those people that are working in your organization? So Chief Shaw, I'm going to start with you. If you want to go ahead and tell us what you're doing there in Winnipeg.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for putting this together again. I'm just absolutely pleased that I can do this panel with Chief Sampson and Chief Pegg. So thank you both for joining us. And the presentation that Dr. Carleton was fantastic. So thank you very much. Some of the things that we're doing in the city of Winnipeg, I guess, I kind of feel like we've been not proactive but reactive in some ways, which is a challenge in itself, because you get into this and you don't even realize that you're deep in the quicksand is kind of the way, in some ways, of how we've been feeling. So I guess in April is when we noticed after the initial rush that we were kind of feeling, through going through the activation and seeing, most of Canada shut down. And then in April, you started to see that lull where the workload was starting to get to people, including myself. And we started to see signs and symptoms in others of burnout. So some of the things that we started to do was acknowledging it and talking about it. We started to have individual conversations with our emergency management coordination committee members. And then since then, we have done another CIPSRT presentation on stress, as well as we've started to implement some suggestions from Dr. Carleton in regards to promoting quick 15-minute calls, removing people from the COVID response mechanism for a week if we could, to give them other work, balance out the enormous amount of workload that is happening so that there's other emergency management work that can be done. We implemented some of these campaigns throughout our city workforce as well. And currently what we're doing is what I'm doing is I'm checking in with our team members. At any given time, we could have 40 to 80 individuals in the Emergency Management Coordination Committee working on COVID-related projects. So we try and through a span of control process to reach out and talk to people. Even a quick text or a phone call appears to be helpful, but we are also struggling in trying to find innovative and new solutions to be able to get through this. And just to acknowledge that I myself have also felt these symptoms. And we all need to continue to do more. So thanks for the question.
I am going to ask the same question. Let's start with Chief Sampson. So the same question then, what is your city, and it's Calgary, doing to help support people's mental health in your organization?
So a couple of things. And first off, I'd say this was a different one than any other calls that we've done previously. I mean, we've done protracted events that we're the responders to, and that we're dealing with their problem almost to a person. We've never seen an incident like the pandemic with the depth and breadth, so that there was not anyone that you dealt with that didn't have some issue going on. And so you're not just a responder, you're also a patient, or you're also a victim of what was going on with this. And of course, it exacerbated for those who had young kids and those that had senior parents. And of course, Calgary was hit hard when we started. So right away, one of the things that we did, that I'll just add to some of the things that Jay did, because Jay's, I sometimes feel that we don't do enough for our staff. But one of the things we did was put on these town halls for staff. And so it would be across all city staff. We'd have around 4,500 on at a time. And we knew that people would come and go on those lines, but we brought the medical experts to the table to them. And so we used Lauren Janussi, we used a guy by the behavioral psychologist by the name of Tavis Campbell. We made those folks available to that broad range of staff. We also did the things, like the mental health, how can I help my team? Those sort of things, a self-care assessment. And, those sorts of things, along with psychological first aid training. But again, I think the challenge and I don't think that we've adequately expressed it for this problem, is how the depth and breadth and how it affects everybody, every responder. I'd go to work all day, and when I came home, I had a wife and a daughter who were stir crazy. And so, you've got to refire up the energy and go out with them and do something different. And that's draining, because when you come home, all you want to do is just hit the couch. And I know this is an appropriate, doctor, maybe have a cold beer, right? And sort of say, that was a hell of a day. I didn't enjoy that day, and here's how we can do it going forward. But everybody is part of it. The other thing, if I can, just for 1 second, I think we have to acknowledge that what was different in this one is that if we chose route A, we went down route A, maybe 5 or 10 people were going to die in the system. And if we chose route B, maybe there'd be 100 people die. And I don't think that we have a lot of these sort of circumstances where they're not even acute anymore because it's such a protracted event, where we're having to make decisions and saying, do we spend $100,000 on a media campaign to try and, reach right into the family and deal with this? Or do we spend 200 grand and make these videos up and do this? And if we spend the lesser amount, how many people will get COVID? If we spend the greater amount, will it be that number minus some? And I don't think we've had those things. And I think I personally believe we all carry them on us. And I can't imagine what Chief Pegg has gone through in Toronto, just from the perspective of the other piece. I'd say, as I'm a long-time responder with an EMS background, a fire background, and then emergency management. But I can't believe how many experts there became on COVID, and the good idea fairies that would light up the inboxes of counselors or the mayor's office saying, we should just do this, we should just do that. And so I can't imagine what either Chief Shaw or Chief Pegg have had to deal with in that regard. But those are some of the things we did. If I was to say what was the best investment, the very, very best investment was to do the live town halls twice a week. And they heard right from the top, and myself, so the city manager and myself, a couple of times a week, exactly what was going on, what it meant for the job, what it meant to them, because everybody was carrying that baggage. Thanks.
So, Chief Pegg, I'm going to hand it over to you for the last mention on this question. Again, what is your city doing to help during this crisis?
Sure, thanks, and thank you, everyone. So I won't repeat much of what's been said. I would just say ditto to. I'm really, when I think about what I just heard Tom say, that this issue of misinformation and the management or dispelling misinformation has certainly been an enormous lift and continues to be an enormous lift. And that is, obviously from the public standpoint, from the media standpoint, but I'm not sure that we appreciated soon enough or early on enough the impact that would have on our own people, because we're bombarded with these conspiracy theories and what Tom call it, the information fairies. Like it's incredible the amount of information that comes at people. So we too went to a town hall style process, transitioned very quickly, at least in government terms, transitioned very quickly to remote and telework or electronic remote work, and we're able to do those town halls. They were really very helpful. The one thing I'm really glad that we did, it happened organically, but when we came out of wave one and we're squarely in the restart and city restart and recovery phase for a short period of time, we were able to give the people that had been most impacted, or the people that had done some of the really heavy lifting in the first wave, they were afforded a little bit of time away. That was big, because of course all of those folks are now back. The other thing that I'll just add on is that I'm really proud of our city and the collective bargaining agents as well. We were able to provide some significant enhancement in mental health and psychological care benefits that have not only been expanded through the collective bargaining process, but the city really stepped up to make sure that people that weren't necessarily covered by those provisions were extended the same provisions. So giving people additional funding and additional access to professional mental health and psychological care has been big. The last thing I'll say is just that it seems like an insignificant thing, but we're really trying hard, and one of the spaces that I do my best to work in is just to continue to be very public and very open about the fact that we are all in this together. And I know that they become these overused terms, but just reinforcing the fact publicly and without any sense of embarrassment or stigma or anything negative attached to it, that it is okay not to be okay. And that I think equally importantly in this circumstance, at least from what I experience personally and what I see, the reactions that all of us are having, and just being able to help our own teams understand that what we're feeling, those are very healthy, very normal reactions to a very abnormal situation. And I can tell you that I've seen there's a weight that starts to come off when people start to understand that, you know, it's okay that I feel this way, and it's okay that I feel anxious and fear and, you know, all of those things, and that, you know, maybe I want to go and talk to somebody about it. That's all positive. So I'll echo everything that my colleague said, and you know, I'll leave it there at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Pegg. I am going to move on to the second discussion topic, unless, Nick, did you have anything you wanted to add on that first topic? Okay, perfect. So our next topic is going to be what new challenges are you seeing now that we're moving into a second wave of COVID? It was expected, but it's still, I think, been different than was even expected. So Chief Sampson, I'm going to start with you on that question.
That's really interesting. We've of course put a mask bylaw in place, and one of the questions is constantly, what is the trigger to take that mask bylaw off, and you know, what are the sort of implications of that? So when will you do it? So one of the things that I have seen is a real resistance by the government, our provincial government, to step in and say, we'd like to do the following. They've just really taken a hands-off approach. And, you know, so businesses out there and they're doing their own things. Now, I don't know whether this is going to turn out to be genius or not. And I suspect it might be, because I think we're going to see we see our retransmission rates crawling down. But I think what I've seen is the challenging thing I've seen is with respect to COVID itself, just that piece of difficulty that we're back at it, and the government standing back. I think what that does then, so because I need to go forward and say, what does that mean to our staff? What that means is staff are doing things that they never thought they'd have to do before. They're getting engaged in conversations that they thought would be managed by the government or managed by health, or the school boards are wide open with a number of cases, and so we're wandering into areas that haven't traditionally been ours. And I think that makes us all a little bit nervous, because we're very conscious about staying in our swim lanes. The other part that I think is happening for us, and I think this is a positive thing psychologically, is we've had time in this little lull to step back and watch how this thing has affected people. And in reality, this is the one time when responders, caregivers, they're the lucky ones right now. The lucky ones in the sense that we all have stable employment. We probably have systems set up to manage kids because our folks work shift work, or they may work shift work. And so we're the lucky ones in this. And I think there's been a piece there where we've sort of tried to promote being grateful for the fact that we're in a good place, not being braggarts about that, but being grateful about where we're at. I'm not sure I answered your question, but just a perspective of mine. I know that as we move forward, everybody's tired. Everybody's tired. And you can tell by my backdrop here, I'm actually out on the West Coast. And, you know, I just tell you, I really needed a break. I really did need a break. And unfortunately, the break that we got was to go to the West Coast and deal with some family challenges that are actually stemming from COVID. So, indirectly, in the sense that they're isolated and they're having all these challenges. And so, isn't it interesting, right? You think you're going to go get a break, but you're not getting a break because you're doing some other things. Always good to have a change of scenery, though. Thanks.
I'm glad you got the change of scenery at least. All right, so Chief Pegg, I'm going to put the question to you. What new challenges do you see in this second wave compared to the first?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. So throughout the first wave, we talked about, we kind of put this moniker around this thing that we called COVID fatigue, and the fact that it was, very prevalent, and not only from a responder and all of the city coordination and the entire team that, including Toronto Public Health, that are managing this thing, but there was a very real sense of mounting fatigue out in the city and out in each of the communities. What I would say I didn't necessarily see coming is, as we've come into the second wave, it's hard to explain, but it's almost as if the fatigue aspect is being left, And we're now finding that we're dealing with people where this is starting to become normalized, and not from a good place. Some of the provisions like the physical distancing and the masking, and just, it's almost like there's this normalization of a really bad thing. And it's triggering all of these emotions and all of these responses in the people that we serve and in the members of our team. That looks to me, the way we see it, from a public standpoint, we're seeing, I would say, significantly reduced levels of compliance with public health advice and direction, a lot more pushback, a lot more angst, and the temperature, if you will, out on the street and just around the city is steadily increasing. The environment is becoming less friendly, more angst, even more hostility, and and early on in the first wave, people were, I think, were generally speaking, were afraid, and therefore there were pretty good compliance rates. There wasn't a lot of pushback. When we here in Toronto, we just recently, heading into the second wave, shut down a number of establishments, including dine-in, eat-in dining, so restaurants. The first time that restaurants were shut down, that was excruciatingly painful for them. Shutting them down the second time has gone from painful to angry. So our enforcement teams are dealing with a lot of pushback. There's a lot more engagement with law enforcement than there was before, and that's translating on the street. So I think those are just a few examples of what we're seeing. And then, of course, within all of the incident management structure and everyone that's working in all of those different capacities, it is really that we're dancing on burnout, if not there, and just doing our best to keep up with a circumstance that we're back in this world where now it's changing day to day and sometimes hour to hour. So keeping up with that is a heavy lift for sure.
Good to hear your side of it and understand, because I know Toronto's a little bit different from some of the other areas in the country. You guys are hit a little harder. Chief Shaw, I'm going to finish up with you if you want to talk about what's changed for you guys during the second wave.
All right, thanks for the question. So I think the first thing that I want to talk a little bit about is that now that we're getting into the dark days here in Winnipeg with the caseloads becoming so prevalent, the plans that we put in place that we didn't fully have to implement to protect essential services and critical services, now they're going to have to be done. And when you add the layer of potential other hazards like flu or any other hazard that emergency managers would be normally faced with, it could be a storm, it could be a power outage, it could be anything. When we look at the civil unrest that happened in the United States and even in Winnipeg, some of the protests that we've had right here at City Hall, the other consequences that are going to affect us when we're already going at 130, 140% capacity. And then I have to be able to spell off resources to be able to deal with another consequence. To me, those types of things potentially worry me, and I worry about the capacity and what that will do if we're not continuing to give people breaks and allow them to get that recovery. We use resiliency as a buzzword a little bit too much now, and I think that we actually really got to think about what that's going to look like as we get into the winter months. So I'm a little worried about some of the other consequences that could happen on top of what's happening with COVID that will additionally affect our mental health.
All right, so we have been getting some questions coming in as the session has gone on. So I am going to take a moment and ask some of these questions. Given that we have limited time, I'll probably just direct one of you to answer. So the first question is, how do you deal with a leader that doesn't demonstrate any of the criteria or actions that have been talked about during this session? So how would you, as someone who has reached a high leadership level, deal with other leaders who may not be showing that support? So Chief Pegg, I'm going to give this one to you.
Oh, gee, thanks. I'll tell you my own personal style. My style is to be very direct. So not afraid to just to express what's happening. And I think I think the piece that maybe is a little different, and people that come from, I'll speak for me. I haven't always been very comfortable talking about the way certain things make me feel, but I would say that being comfortable expressing the reason that this is important to me, this is how it's making me feel, this is how it's affecting my own health and the health of my team. I would think those would be good strategies. The other thing that I do is I have a support network, and I have a group of colleagues that are close to me that I trust, and we have a confidential relationship where I can sit and have that conversation and get some advice and some perspective. I think that I can tell you from lived experience recently, it's very easy for I think for all of us to jump to to make an assumption even that there's something nefarious going on, when sometimes what I need to be reminded of is the people that I work for and the people that I report to are tired and stressed as well. And sometimes it is about having that check-in and how are you doing, and the reframing, and really talking a little bit more about our health and how we're doing as opposed to the issue. But tough circumstance for sure. I think organizationally it's always going to be a little different from situation to situation, but for me it's about being honest and candid and willing to talk about the way things make me feel.
Thank you for that answer. The next question is, how do you as a leader recognize your own triggers of stress, and how do you deal with it? And I'm going to give that one to Chief Sampson.
I think from a personal perspective, my triggers over a long period of time have been some of the more social pieces and how it affects the community. And so when I see places like our drop-in center and those sorts of things, it's sort of back to the point that we're the fortunate ones. The ones that I think are really unfortunate in this sort of thing are the people who don't have any options and can't make, the person who, if they don't go to work, they don't get paid, some of those sort of situations. And so for me, those are the things that have affected me most. And then I think the second thing would be my own family situation. And I mentioned that before, when you go home and people say, I've had enough of this, I just want to do X, Y, or Z, or just let me go back to my job, Dad, sort of that sort of thing. Those haven't gone well in terms of from a personal perspective.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Last questions for you here, Chief Shaw. Are you seeing any reluctance for people to continue to serve in emergency management roles? And do you think fatigue and uncertainty are playing a role with that?
So I haven't necessarily seen any reluctance. What I have seen is members of our team that are tired and exhibiting some of the burnout signs and symptoms. And they've spelled off with their partners in their department branch areas to be able to help out. So I haven't seen any reluctance. What I've seen though is capacity failures for myself and from others. So experiencing that phenomenon of information overload, where too many emails in the inbox, missing something that was important. Trying to gather as much information to get situational awareness to be able to inform my bosses so that they can help me make a decision. And I know that others on the team are experiencing that as well. And I think that potentially could lead to situations where people no longer want to be dealing with emergency management issues. But what I've seen is a group of individuals that are dedicated and that they just want to do the best. We have a mission statement here in the city. I'm sure that many of our emergency managers across the country have the same or close to, but we want to save as many lives as possible in the city of Winnipeg, and we want to protect our critical infrastructure and our critical services that we provide to our residents. And everything that we do is linked to that. And I feel like our people that work on our team, that they're committed to that. But I do agree that if we keep down this path, you're going to have people that maybe they're going to be taking even a longer break, and you're going to have to renew and refresh with more energy and more individuals.
I just wanted to chime in a bit on something Jay said. One of the things that we've done to help people is we've brought in some of the experts. So like you have Dr. Carleton on this line, we brought those people in for our leaders who aren't playing along, and we let them have either generally it's a group session, but a group session with the psychologist, a group session with and because counselors can be challenging, and we brought in their staff also so that they could get sort of a bit of a coaching on how to deal with behaviorally difficult people. But I know from an emergency management perspective, if I can line up other people to help me with my opinion, in a sense, they echo that, and they've got, an MD behind their name or a PhD behind their name, there's a bit of a taking the pressure off the emergency manager that they're not just saying this alone, that there's a whole team that's been created. And so for us, we engaged the University of Calgary, Cummings School of Medicine, and the O'Brien Institute for Data. And so we've engaged those people. We've engaged those people with counsel, and as such, it's taken some of the heat off my job a little bit. I can tell you that emergency management jobs, they're good jobs for people who are longer in their career, because there's lots of heat here from time to time. Why don't you open this business up, or why don't you shut this one down? Those sorts of calls that we really don't have the authority to do. So anyway, it's a side piece.
Thank you for that. So I do have a question that I'll direct towards actually Dr. Carleton. Is there data on the prevalence of mental health illness across emergency management personnel? And do you know if any studies are being done to show if there's been an increase during COVID?
That's a great question. It depends on what we mean by emergency management personnel. There is some indicator data that we've got, but public safety personnel, we just recently got a large-scale sample on them a couple of years ago. So specific to the management team, not that I've seen, but I would expect that they would be experiencing the same kinds of stressors that we see for any of the other public safety personnel leaders. And so I would expect that we would see the same kinds of rates for them, which means that they're experiencing challenges right now. And those stresses are going to impact them. It's easy for us to look at them as heroes, and some of us do, and we look at our leadership or our PSP communities as heroes, and they are in many ways, but they're also humans, right? So they're experiencing stresses and challenges.
So I am just going to finish up. I know we're running low on time, but this is a question which I think it deserves an answer. And I am going to give each chief about a minute to give an answer. If you are a lower level public safety personnel, so if you're in a lower position, how can you start the conversation with your leaders about putting these self-care actions in place? How would you suggest broaching that conversation with them, knowing that there is that power disparity between those that are kind of lower and those that are higher? And I'm going to start with Chief Pegg on that one. Sorry, I'm throwing you the hard one again.
My answer is going to be similar to what I said the first time. My style and the style that my team is accustomed to is be comfortable being direct and being candid and honest. I think the biggest, I'll say this, in my experience, the biggest hesitation, or the reason that I see people being reluctant to bring forward those types of solutions and questions, is really the same reason why we're still fighting stigmas around mental health, right? It's an uncomfortable conversation, and what it really takes is just having the courage to go there, right? Just if it's me, let me know it's a priority. Let me know why it's important to you. If you can come with an idea or a solution or a proposal that goes along with the concern, I think that goes a long way. And that's, that's my style for sure.
Chief Shaw, your thoughts?
Sorry, mute button. I would say maybe a little bit more of a tactical level approach to decide what you're more comfortable with in terms of how you're going to reach out to your group. So we need to be able to lead across, lead down, and lead up. So the first thing that I would recommend is talk to people in your peer group, people that you feel comfortable talking about, and then make a plan to be able to communicate up the chain, down the chain. And you do that by building your confidence in what you're going to say, and then attacking it, and basically coming out, just like Chief Pegg said, and say, be direct, come out, say what you need to say, have that conversation, do it in a way where you're comfortable. You need to be comfortable to be able to lead with new information, and that's going to show that courage. So I would encourage anyone that has ideas or that has a feeling that they want to be able, or a piece of information that they want to be able to express. If you're uncomfortable with it, if you want to practice or talk with a colleague first, and then you got to go for it. And I think that if you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to feel that relief when you find out that other people are feeling the exact same way as you. And that's going to be the benefit that you're going to find. And when you build that confidence from the peer-to-peer group, you'll have that confidence to be able to have those conversations and move that conversation up and down.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Chief Sampson, if you want to answer the question as well.
Sure. So if I was a lower level person in emergency management, the first thing I'd say is this should be something you're working on regardless of COVID, is to always come forward with relevant information for your boss or for others that you can use, and ask yourself that question: how can I actually use this information that I'm bringing forward? I find there's a lot of value to be added, because I think we get our heads down sometimes and we don't think about, have you thought about your emergency social services group, or have you done this? So I would think around the peripheries of issues to bring forward those pieces, and always help us understand the people-related aspects of what we're doing. I think, right now with COVID, when you look at my call list in a day is mayors, deputy ministers, councillors, and then, other directors and whatnot in the city. I need other people who are thinking about all the other layers of the city and coming forward with relevant information. And I'd remind people to, if you're trying to get more influence with others, the 5 steps of hostage negotiation, I love it. You can Google that, 5 steps for FBI hostage negotiation. And you know what? You use them on your boss. You use them on that person who's not following the rules, your leader that's not following the rules that they need to, so you're thinking about active listening, empathy, building rapport, causing influence to occur, and then ultimately having a behavioral change at the end. And I would say there's real value in sort of focusing on those things as you move forward. And as I say, maintain the relevance, help remind us that we need to do things. We have a little Connect program that causes everybody to get together and walk outside as a result of COVID. Those are good things to do. So thanks.
Thank you. Nick, I'm going to offer you the last word on the presentation here and on the situation. Go ahead.
I think I'll just dovetail off of the answers from the chiefs. I would suggest that if it does help to have an MD or a PhD after your name in order to help make these transition changes, and I can understand why that would be the case. Dr. Alex Hebert, who's the Chief Psychiatrist of Veterans Affairs Canada, she's our lead author on a publication that is openly available on our website. It was a peer-reviewed publication. She was the lead for our CRRP task force. A lot of the highlights for leaders and leadership are in that document. It's very short, it's very accessible. I'd recommend that may be a useful tool to help motivate some of these changes that we're being asked about. And it's a really good resource for everybody to use as a quick checklist now and again. And I want to thank and congratulate all of the panelists on the incredible job they're doing in already doing a lot of the things on that checklist. So thank you all for modeling such terrific leadership behaviors for everybody through this extraordinarily challenging time.
All right, Nick, I will echo your thanks to our panelists. We really appreciate the time and effort that you have given in allowing us to do this presentation. Just so you know, there will be a short survey that will appear after the town hall is finished. We hope that you will take the couple of minutes to answer the questions that we have there. A video of the town hall you watched today will be sent in a follow-up email tomorrow, so look for that. Do please consider joining us for our next town hall, which is going to be November the 18th. It is titled, "I Don't Think You Should Be Here, Understanding and Overcoming Gender Disparities in Policing." Next week, we'll also be starting our post-traumatic stress injuries research series that will begin next Thursday. This series is presented in partnership with the CIHR and will highlight the great research done on post-traumatic stress injuries through the 2019 Catalyst grants. Look for links to both of those sessions in the email follow-up tomorrow. We hope that you will consider attending. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here today and giving their valuable time to listen to our webinar. I want everyone to take care, wash your hands, wear a mask, and stay safe. Thank you.